back to my channel and Happy New Year. Back in November, I was invited to film at the YouTube pop-up space at the AFTRS Film School in Sydney, which was an awesome experience. They had built this Winter Wonderland set, so in order to have a makeup which would kind of fit into it, I thought I could do a Wight from Game of Thrones and then play on the pun of having a White Christmas. It would have helped if I had gotten this tutorial up in December, but I had some technical difficulties, but it's here now and I figured better late than never. The makeup itself is kind of a combination of my mountain makeup tutorial, which I still have to edit, and my Revenant frostbitten makeup tutorial, but with more grey, dead tones thrown in. And Bonnie Corban was nice enough to be my model for this, so she came along and kept me entertained all day. Now let's get into the makeup tutorial. So I didn't have a lot of prep time for this, so I used pre-existing molds that I got from Prosaide transfer material, and I filled them with Prosaide transfer and dehydrated them prior to going to Sydney. I also brought over some silicone appliances I had made. I wasn't sure which ones I was going to use, but I ended up going for the Prosaide transfers. Some of you may already be familiar with how you apply a Prosaide transfer because I've done them in a couple of other tutorials, but if not, I will go into detail here as well. My Prosaide pieces were powdered before I transported them, just in case they fell around in the box and stuck to each other. So I am removing that layer of powder with some isopropyl alcohol. This will also reactivate the Prosaide adhesive that the prosthetic transfers are made of, which will make it sticky enough for me to press down onto this water slide paper. This paper is also from Prosaide transfer material. It's basically like temporary tattoo paper. Once that is stuck down, I cut around the prosthetic appliance so that I don't have a large amount of paper that can poke Bonnie in the face while I'm trying to apply it. I peel off that clear acetate paper layer from the back of the Prosaide appliance, and now it is ready to be applied to Bonnie's face. When you're applying a Prosaide transfer with this method, the only thing that you're seeing when you're sticking it down is the back of the transfer paper. So in order to get a better idea of where the edges of the Prosaide transfer are and what orientation I'm gluing it down, I like to hold the paper up against a light source, and that way I can see through the paper where the edges of the transfer are, and I can use a pencil to trace these on the back of the paper so that when I'm putting it down I have a rough idea of where everything is. Now Bonnie's skin is clean, there's nothing on there which would inhibit this adhering properly, so no moisturizers, no oil or anything like that. And I'm going to position it where I want it and press it gently into her skin so that the sticky Prosaide appliance starts to adhere to her skin. Now to remove that paper backing, you need to activate the water slide paper with some water. So you want enough to saturate through the paper, but not enough water so that you're dripping all over your talent. I'm using a cotton round for this, and I keep dabbing the paper until it's saturated enough to easily come off the Prosaide transfer. If any of the thin edges of the Prosaide transfer like to come up during this process, you can use your dampened cotton round to gently press it back down into the skin. I continue placing the rest of the Prosaide transfers onto Bonnie's face using those same steps. I ended up with 4 Prosaide transfers in total, and you can see some of them are darker than the others. The lighter ones are a different color of Prosaide transfer material, they're pink 5, whereas the darker cheek one is the light Fleshtones color. The cheek one also looks slightly darker because it is a thicker appliance. The next step is using isopropyl alcohol to soften any edges which aren't blended properly. Sometimes you get lucky and the edges are great and you don't need to use any isopropyl alcohol, and other times the edges come up with the process of applying it and you need to soften and melt the Prosaide adhesive using some isopropyl alcohol on a cotton tip. I like to roll the cotton tip away from the appliance. I feel like this helps to blend out and soften those edges a bit faster. Just make sure you don't have too much isopropyl alcohol on them. You don't want it to be dripping all over people's faces, especially if you're around eyes or around the nose or the mouth area. And if you have any edges which aren't blending away or are a bit thick still, you can go over it with creamy Prosaide to patch the edges, which I will do for this a little bit later in the tutorial. Now I'm going to colour match those appliances to better match Bonnie's skin tone. I am going to be putting some washes of grey over all of Bonnie's face to make her look more deceased. But in order for that to all be the same colour, I have to get them to that base colouring first. I'm using the Bluebird Pale Skin Tone palette. It's an alcohol activated palette, and I'm using this medium stipple brush to stipple on a paler skin tone over those appliances to lighten them enough to look more like Bonnie's skin tone. Now, because some of those areas look a bit flat, having just the one lighter tone on them, I'm going to spatter some different layers over the top to kind of adjust the undertones and give it a more lifelike appearance. First, I'm going to use the pastel yellow color from Skin Illustrator's Complexion palette, and I am spattering it on with a cut-off chip brush. I'm also going to add some pinks back into it using the light mauve. And I often use the cool tones and the DT blush tones from the Complexion palette for this step as well. They're really nice finishing skin tone colors. Now that I have the Prosaide transfers roughly the same skin tone as Bonnie, I'm going to seal them before we do any more painting. I'm using Bluebird's matte sealer and I've diluted it about 50% with isopropyl alcohol, and I'm just going to brush that over the Prosaide transfers. This will make it easier for me to paint on top of it with the greys. It will make the Prosaide transfers no longer sticky to the touch, and it will take away some of the shine, which will make the Prosaide transfers look more like skin. Next, I'm going to go in with the spatter brush and the Natural One color from the light Fleshtones palette by Skin Illustrator, just because I made that cheek appliance slightly too pale, and I'm going to darken it just a little bit. To make Bonnie look more undead, we're going to take away all of the rosy, lifelike colors in her face, and the Grunge palette has some really great grays and browns to do this. So I'm going to start with Skin Illustrator Grunge palette using the color Rotten Stone, and again I'm going to spatter this over Bonnie's face using my chip brush. When you are spattering or airbrushing alcohol colors over people's faces, it is important to make sure you don't get it too close to the eyes. I like to cover eyes using my thumb when I'm spattering around it, just to make sure there's no alcohol going into the eyes or right around the eyelids. That could be irritating to the eye. And I also get the person to hold their breath while I'm doing it so that they're not inhaling too much alcohol fumes. Now I'm going back into my Bluebird Pale Flesh Tones color. I'm grabbing the white shade to make it look like all the blood has been drained from Bonnie's face. Now I'm noticing some areas of the Prosaide transfers which have a little bit of a higher edge than what I would like. They're not totally blended down properly. So I'm going to go in with a torn off red stipple sponge and some Prosaide cream, and I'm going to stipple it around the edges of the appliances where I want it to be blended in slightly better. This stuff will fill the edges and kind of make a bridge between the edge of the transfer and the skin so that it looks more like a seamless transition and not as much like a ledge. Once that Prosaide cream adhesive has dried, I'm going to go back in again with the Grunge palette. This time I'm using a custom mix of colors to create this dark grey color that I'm going to spatter over Bonnie's face using the chip brush again. Now I'm going to move on to cream colors. I'm using Ben Nye's Ultimate FX Character Palette, and I've mixed up a custom grey color using their brown and the blue tone. They don't actually have a grey tone in this, but once you mix the blue and the grey, it looks really nice for under eye bags. And I'm going to use this to create depth and shadows around the eyes to make them look more receded, because I think the eye sockets and the skin does start to sink when the body starts to decay. I'm going to start off by drawing a soft line along Bonnie's tear trail and then above her eyelid in the crease, and then I'm going to blend that out with a fluffier brush. I'm also going to use this color over the lips because the fastest way to make someone look dead is to take the pink out of their lips. I went back and added a little bit more, which I regret. I think it was at a good level here, and I think I overdid it slightly, so you know, this is the kind of stuff I always learn when I edit these things, is that I get to a point and then I overpaint. It's not too bad, but I think I like it more subtle. I also apply this color into the temples to make those look a little bit more sunken as well. Now back to alcohol paints. I'm going to paint the inside of those rotted wounds. I'm starting with a pink color. I think this is the light mauve from the Complexions palette again. Then I am deepening that color with the dark mauve, also from the Complexions palette. Once I have finished filling in all of the wounds, I'm going to start painting in the rotted colors. There's some really good colors in the Necromania palette. The lighter yellow color is called Vile Bile, and the darker brown color is called Darth Moss, and they're both really great for this kind of look. And I also use some of the aged blood tone from the Skin Illustrator FX palette. So I start with the Vile Bile to add some less pink, less fresh coloring to the wound, and then the Darth Moss kind of replicates that scab or really old wound coloring, and then a little bit of the aged blood just to make it look a little bit more traumatic without needing any blood. I continue that coloring scheme into the rest of the wounds, and the Vile Bile shade is really good also for any fatty tissue textures, and then the aged blood and the Darth Moss are really good for creating depth. I go back in with a clean brush with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to blend those colors together slightly more. Then I go back in one last time with the aged blood and the Darth Moss to add depth to any areas which I think are lacking contrast. Now to create that frostbitten look of a Wight that's been out in the middle of a snowy forest, I'm going to be using a Maekup online product called Dried Salt, and I am mixing it down with some KY jelly so that it's a bit thinner and a bit easier to spread. And I'm going to be putting this through Bonnie's eyebrows, on the tip of her nose, and around her lips. Any areas that I want to amp up a little bit, I'm going to go back over with a second layer, but this time undiluted, just pure dried salt. It does dry a lot whiter than what you initially see, so it is wise to let it dry for about 10-15 minutes to see the full effect. I also put a little bit of that mixture over the wounds and the rest of the face, but I want it to be really concentrated around the nose and the mouth, as that's where moisture comes out of, and over the eyebrows. Now I'm going to put a layer of KY jelly into the center of the wounds. Because there's no fake blood being used, that usually adds a gloss or a shine, whereas the alcohol colors can look quite matte. So in order to make the inside of the wounds look a bit juicier and a bit more lifelike, I'm going to add the KY jelly, which will give them that juicy shine. Now for the last step, we're going to make Bonnie's hair look a bit more wild by taking it out, messing it up with our hands, putting conditioner through it so it looks oily and unwashed, and then putting in some hairspray so it keeps that appearance. Then for her very last minute costume, we had a Christmas sweater and some random pieces of fur and leather. Then we let Bonnie loose in the Winter Wonderland setting and had some fun. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned some cool stuff about applying Prosaide transfers and how to make people look dead or how to make people look frozen. And I will be back soon. I've got to edit a couple more of my holiday themed videos, but they're pretty applicable to anything really. It's taking silicone life casts and painting silicone with realistic skin tones, and I'll be editing those next. So keep an eye out. If you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe here and it will tell you when those videos are loaded. Many thanks to Bonnie for coming in on her Sunday and letting me poke and prod her face and do really stupid stuff in the Winter Wonderland set. And thank you to AFTRS for filming me apply makeup with 4 separate cameras, including some really sexy close-ups. I'm sure it wasn't the most interesting thing to film, but I appreciate the wonderful job that you did. Alright, that is it for today's tutorial. I will see you guys in the next one, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Alright, bye for now. I will see you guys soon.